After fact-checking President Trump's tweets and subsequently censoring one of his posts for promoting violence, President Trump has taken aim at Twitter with an executive order that targets the Section 230 protections of social media companies who censor content. This is all under the pretext that social media platforms have just grown too powerful, and they need to be reined in order to protect Americans from these social media platforms controlling the free discourse of ideas and suppressing the First Amendment rights of Americans. However, who really stands to benefit from Trump's executive order? The American people or the dangerous tech giants that Trump is supposedly reining in? Let's discuss on the 2 Day with 2 Cents podcast. All right. Hello, everyone. This is My 2 Cents, and welcome back to the 2 Day with 2 Cents podcast. It's been a while since we did one of these, but this issue is too important not to talk about. So let's take a look at President Trump's executive order, the one he's just passed in response to Twitter censoring his tweets and fact-checking his tweets. Now, if we look at the executive order, it is broken down into 8 sections, and the first 5 of which are most critical to understanding its intent. The first section discusses the importance of the First Amendment and free speech. The second outlines and describes Section 230 protections and distinguishes between online platforms and online publishers. Section 3 directs federal agencies not to spend taxpayer funds on social media platforms found to be engaging in biased political activism, as outlined in Section 2. Section 4 directs the Federal Trade Commission to investigate and take appropriate legal action against social media platforms that are engaging in, quote, unfair or deceptive acts. And Section 5 directs the Attorney General to create a working group to, quote, regarding the potential enforcement of state statutes that prohibit online platforms from engaging in unfair or deceptive acts or practices, end quote. And then the final 3 sections of the executive order deal with legal definitions and the applicability of the order in light of existing executive and legislative structures. Now, I don't think anyone doubts that Twitter is a biased platform. They are not politically neutral in how they censor content, and various users have been complaining about this for a long time. However, red flags always go up in my mind whenever someone touts regulation of social media as the answer to online censorship, and they should go up in your mind as well. And the reason for that is, regardless of the stated intent of these regulations, the practical impact is always that regulations make it more difficult for businesses to operate. And by extension, they therefore ensure that it is more difficult for competition to enter the market, which ultimately ensures that only the largest and allegedly the most dangerous of these corporations can continue to operate. So while Trump's executive order may be viewed by some as a threat to Twitter's monopoly on information, it actually sows the seeds that would lead to the permanent entrenchment of that monopoly, either for Twitter or another social media platform. Now let's just think through this logically. So Section 1 of this executive order talks about the First Amendment. And granted, the First Amendment guarantees Americans the right to freedom of speech. But what that really means is that government cannot prevent you from using the tools available to you to speak your mind. You are free to state whatever opinions you have, using whatever mediums are available to you. But freedom of speech does not mean that your local college campus is required to give you an auditorium and a microphone when you want one, nor is anyone required to listen to you if they don't want to. And to drive this point home, while your neighbor has the right to stand on his front lawn and spew his opinions to whoever is willing to listen, he is not entitled to come into your home and shout his opinions in your ear without your consent. Simply put, freedom of speech does not guarantee you access to a privately owned speech platform, whether that platform is physical, online, or otherwise. Now, of course, at this point, the proponents of Trump's executive order will stand up and say, well, you're forgetting the distinction between publishers and platforms. No one is saying Twitter can't censor content, but if they do, then they're a publisher and not a platform. And that's where Section 2 of the executive order comes into play. Now, under current U.S. law, Section 230 protections protect online platforms from legal liability for what their users post. So if someone uses Twitter or Facebook or another platform to coordinate criminal activity or to defame someone else, the platform can't be sued for the user's actions. You could only take action against the actual user who made the posts or sent the messages or whatever. This is in contrast to a publisher like the New York Times or CNN, where if the company actually employs individuals to post content and then edits and approves that content, then the entire corporation is liable for whatever is posted. However, it's worth noting that Section 230 protections do extend to publishers if they have a public comment section. So while the New York Times may be legally liable for what their journalists post, they are not legally liable for what their users post in the public comment section on those articles. And more importantly, Section 230 does not therefore mean that platforms cannot engage in censorship of any kind. Now, here is a direct quote from the third paragraph of Section 2 of Trump's executive order. Quote, "In particular, subparagraph C2 expressly addresses protections from civil liability and specifies that an interactive computer service provider may not be made liable on account of its decision in good faith to restrict access to content that it considers to be obscene, lewd, lascivious, filthy, excessively violent, harassing, or otherwise objectionable. It is the policy of the United States to ensure that, to the maximum extent permissible under the law, this provision is not distorted to provide liability protection for online platforms that, far from acting in good faith to remove objectionable content, instead engage in deceptive or pretextual actions, often contrary to their stated terms of service, to stifle viewpoints with which they disagree." End quote. So in other words, under Section 230 protections, platforms can in fact remove objectionable content without becoming a publisher, but they can't stifle viewpoints with which they disagree. And here lies the real problem with this executive order or any subsequent legislation of this nature. And that is, who gets to decide what is or is not objectionable? The platform itself or the government? Now, you don't have to like the actions of Twitter with regards to who they choose to censor or not censor. You can point out their blatant political activism or their hypocrisy and how they selectively enforce their own terms of service. And even if applicable, users are free to file lawsuits against Twitter or other social media platforms if they can demonstrate that Twitter has engaged in a contract violation by refusing to abide by their own terms of service. However, at the end of the day, if Twitter remains a private company and users are free to associate or not associate with them, then by freedom of association, Twitter will reserve the right to censor or not censor content as they please. By extension, if a sufficient amount of people are unhappy with Twitter, Twitter will start losing revenue and they will have to alter their behavior in order to sufficiently please their customers. Now, on that note, I think that of all the sections of Trump's executive order, the one that possibly has merit here is Section 3, where Trump directs federal agencies to stop advertising on platforms that are censoring political viewpoints because he doesn't want federal tax dollars going towards platforms that engage in this level of political activism. Now, this would in effect be Donald Trump directing his subordinates not to do business with organizations that engage in what he considers to be undesirable behavior. And that seems to me to be perfectly legitimate. But what about any other measure that seeks to, by force, tell social media companies what they can and can't censor? It's important to note that I don't think anyone wants a social media platform to be completely unable to conduct censorship of any kind. Users, for the most part, don't want pornography or meaningless spam all over their feeds. And at the very least, users themselves want to be able to block or censor certain content on their own feeds. So everyone does want some level of censorship on social media. They just don't want the executives at Twitter or some other company to be making the decisions regarding what is and is not acceptable to censor. So if you try to prevent this by Trump passing an executive order or ultimately passing legislation, some sort of online Bill of Rights, as some have proposed, then who really is making the decisions about what is and is not acceptable to post? The obvious answer is the government. Government bureaucrats appointed by President Trump, but in effect, non-elected government bureaucrats are going to be the ones making the decision about what social media companies can and cannot censor. President Trump specifically directs the Federal Trade Commission and the Attorney General to be looking to take legal action against those companies found to be censoring content for political purposes. And while all the MAGA hat-wearing crowd might be really happy with this, what are you going to do if Joe Biden gets elected and suddenly it's his attorney general making the decisions about what social media can and cannot censor? Further, once this level of legislation is enacted, anyone who wants to start a competing social media platform is now going to have to work their way through all the costs and red tape associated with this level of government regulation. And that will effectively ensure that there will only be at most a handful of government-approved social media platforms that users can pick from. Now, at least in a free market, users can choose not to do business with social media platforms that they object to. But once government regulation steps in under the guise of protecting the users, the remaining platforms will in effect have state-enforced monopolies that are completely immune from competition. And the final say-so for what you can and can't post will be in the hands of the government. Is that really what Donald Trump wants? Is that really what freedom-loving Americans want? Well, probably, but it's not what they should want. So what should Donald Trump do about Twitter censoring his content? Honestly, the best thing he could do, close his Twitter account and start using an alternative platform. Or heck, even create his own platform. The man certainly has the means to do that. Now, if Donald Trump did that, he would overnight attract millions of users to that new platform. And in his position of prominence as the president of the United States, he has more potential than just about anyone else to give that competing platform the boost they need to become a serious competitor to Twitter. Anyways, that's my thoughts on the matter. Time to unveil the weekly hottie. Drum roll, please. This week's weekly hottie is Cassidy Coles. She's been the weekly hottie before, but deserves a repeat this week due to her recent bikini haul. That's it for this week's podcast, but I want to hear your thoughts. Be sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe below. And as always, that is my 2 cents. Take it for what it's worth. Thanks everyone for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to like, share, and subscribe, as well as hit the bell to receive notifications so that you never miss an upload. And if you're a fan of my channel, please consider supporting me on Subscribestar, Bitbacker, or Patreon to receive special rewards. All links can be found in the About section of my website, my2centsvideos.com.